Hello and welcome back to the KFit Show. My name is Kalan Anglos. I am your host. I am a human performance expert and PhD candidate at the University of Victoria. Got some exciting research coming down the pipelines in the world of combat sports. That's what I specialize in, is combat sports. This is the KFit Show. We look at how to train, how to do things correctly. We break down different ways to train, how to do the proper things. Today's episode, we're going to have a couple different segments. We got a little bit of change happening here on the KFit Show a little bit. So stay tuned for that. Before we get started, I want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Graphic FX. If you need any graphic design work done, from logos, business cards, sign development, anything like that, Jay and his team at Graphic FX can look after you. They do high quality work. They're very professional, and they can help you in any way that you need. Any graphic effects, any graphic design work, go see Graphic Effects in Victoria, BC. They'll look after you. Let's get started with this episode of the KFit Show.
Orion nav transition is complete.
Hello, my name is Kalan Anglos, and I am a certified strength and conditioning specialist. Sounds pretty good, huh?
10, 9, 8, 7, 6.
And this is the KFit Show.
5, 4,
3, 2, 1.
Ooh, doggy, it is warm outside. Summer has finally arrived on the West Coast. It's been warm-ish, but now it is cooking hot. Shout out to anybody that's out in the Okanagan having to battle those fires going on right now. Stay safe up there. I got some family up there that had to be evacuated. It's scary situation, but I know some firefighters that are out there fighting their hardest. So my thoughts are with you guys up north and in the Okanagan. Hopefully you guys are staying safe. Everybody else, thank you for tuning in to the KFit Show. This episode is going to be a little bit different. Usually on the KFit Show, what we've done is we've just kind of breaking down a training concept or a physiological measure or something like that and talked about that for the entire episode. Today, it's going to be a little bit different. How this is going to look is I am going to talk still about one specific training adaptation. Today, it's going to be the stretch-shortening cycle we're going to talk about. But I'm also going to introduce a couple new segments. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something that's called Sensei Says. Sensei Says. It's an old, play on the Simon Says game. It's very common in a lot of martial arts clubs. Sensei says do 10 push-ups. Sensei says whatever, right? So this is just something that I thought of. Actually, when I first was putting this podcast together and I was thinking of kind of the name I was going to go with, Sensei Says was one of the names that kind of came up. But, since I am in martial arts, I am a sensei technically, and a lot of my friends just call me sensei just because. So Sensei Says is going to be a segment, comes on later today. We're just going to, that's just something that I'm going to be telling you to do. Real straightforward, this is what I think you should do. Sensei says do this. Okay, so keep listening for that. The other segment we're going to put in there is Ask KFit, ask the expert, so to speak, type thing. So I've had a couple questions come my way in the past couple weeks. I'm going to answer one of them in specific, and we will go from there. If you have any questions for me that are training related, nutrition related, anything to do with optimizing performance, send them my way and I will possibly feature them on the show. You can use the hashtag AskKFit on those and I will be able to find them. All right, so let's just get into a little bit of fight talk before we get going. UFC 214 was this past weekend. What a card it was. The best card of the year in terms of how it looked before, how the matchups wise. 4 huge fights. Well, there's 5 on the main card, but 4 big ones. 3 title fights. We had John Jones versus Daniel Cormier for the light heavyweight championship. That fight was crazy. You also had in the co-main event, or one of the co-main events, you had Chris Cyborg going up against Tanya Evinger. I'm going to talk a little bit just about that. And then also you had Tyrone Woodley defending his welterweight belt against Damian Maia. What a snooze fest that fight was. And then also Robbie Lawler versus Cowboy Cerrone. Those fights were crazy. I just want to talk a little bit about a couple things. First of all, John Jones, best MMA fighter of all time. There's really no question about that now, right? Pound for pound, the best, knocking out Daniel Cormier in the third round. I actually had Daniel Cormier winning the first couple rounds there. So, it was a tight fight up until the point that Jon Jones knocked his head off with a kick. But what I found really interesting was that in the interview after, when Jon Jones was talking to Joe Rogan, he said, we noticed in training camp that when we looked at videos of Daniel Cormier, he dipped his head to the side every time he threw that right hand. And they were just kind of looking for that. He said, we were training for this, we were waiting for it, and sure enough, you look at the replay, Daniel Cormier drops his head, Jon Jones knocks his head off with a nice kick, TKO. Actually, it went down as a knockout in the official records there. So, knockout win for Jon Jones, new light heavyweight champion, greatest of all time. And, humble in his victory. These two built up the fight a lot. They were talking trash, but after Jon Jones saying, I looked up to DC, I should be a champion like DC was. So that was really classy, I thought, of Jon Jones. So we'll see what happens there in the light heavyweight division. I think Jon Jones probably has to fight Alex Gustafsson. I think that's got to be the next fight. Just get out of here with that Brock Lesnar talk. That is absolute bullshit. It'd be ridiculous. That would be something absolutely the UFC would do for a money fight, but Jon Jones would walk through Brock Lesnar. It would be an absolute gong show. Don't do it. Fight Alex Gustafsson. That's going to be a big fight. Maybe not as many viewers tune in, but you're actually staying raw to the sport of UFC, and I think that's important. Tyrone Woodley, Damian Maia. I'm going to take the Dana White approach on this. Not even going to talk about it. What a boring fight that was. Tyrone Woodley, he did what he had to do to win, but he did not win any fans in the process. So whatever, it is what it is. Same thing with the Cyborg and Tanya Evinger fight. Cyborg, you kind of knew was going to win that one. Tanya Evinger, what a warrior, though. Took some big shots from the best female fighter of all time in Cyborg. And then finally, Donald Cowboy Cerrone losing against Robbie Lawler. Great fight. I thought maybe Cowboy might have pulled that one out in the scorecard, but Robbie Lawler wound up winning that one. Cowboy's got to fight Wonderboy Thompson. I think that's got to be the next fight in that welterweight division. Both of them coming off losses. I think that would be huge. Robbie Lawler, I think he's got to go against Tyrone Woodley. Give him that rematch. Woodley took the belt from Lawler. You got to give Lawler that chance to get it back now from Woodley. So what a great fight card. In terms of my bet with Rodney, you got me, buddy. I went 0 for 4 on my picks. 0 for 4 on my pick. So we lost the bets on that one, but that's okay. We'll keep that rolling into the next ones, UFC 215. But before that, don't forget, it is now August 2nd as you guys are listening to this. What does that mean? 24 days till McGregor and Mayweather. What an event that's going to be. Can't wait for that. August 26th, tune in. All right, that's enough fight talk. Holy smokes, I didn't even mean to get into that much of it. But there you go. There's my 2 cents people have been asking, so there it is. Now, what I really want to talk about today is the stretch shortening cycle. So let's get into a little bit of what the KFit Show is all about, breaking down a training, featuring something about training. And today I want to talk about the stretch shortening cycle. So what is the stretch shortening cycle? Before we get there, you need to understand something about how the muscle contracts. We've talked about this before, but maybe you didn't tune in to an earlier episode, and how dare you if you haven't already listened to all the episodes of the KFit Show. But let's talk a little bit about concentric and eccentric contractions. So it's a real simple example with a bicep curl. Everybody's familiar with that. When you're lifting the arm up, you're lifting the weight up. That's the concentric, the shortening motion. When you let it back down and the muscle's lengthening, that's the eccentric motion, okay? Every muscle has a concentric and an eccentric action. Eccentric, again, is that lengthening. Concentric is that shortening. So when we talk about the stretch shortening cycle, what we're talking about is a eccentric action, so in a lengthening action that is immediately followed by a concentric action. Okay, so this is more athletic movements, plyometrics. If you think about a box jump, that's kind of what the stretch shortening cycle is training. So when you drop down into kind of like a quarter squat position and then pop right back up into the box jump, that going down into the quarter squat, that's actually the eccentric phase of that, and then we concentrically contract to push ourselves up onto the box. So the eccentric action, when you're going down into that motion, down into your squat nice and fast to jump back up, your tendons and your ligaments in your knee as well as in your hip are lengthening, and they're storing what we call elastic energy or potential energy, elastic energy. And it's just, if you think about a rubber band, just your standard rubber band, if you pull a rubber band nice and stiff, that rubber band is going to be holding potential elastic energy. If you let go of that band, it's going to snap back and forcefully contract type thing. It's the exact same way that your tendons and ligaments and your joints work. You do that eccentric action, the tendons and ligaments stretch, they hold that elastic energy, and then you contract, you concentrically attract, push yourself up in that box, and that's that energy, like that rubber band snapping back, and it's bam, nice and fast. That's how we should be training the stretch shortening cycle. So any actions like that are stretch shortening cycles. If you think about combat sport athletes, when they're bouncing around, moving around, they're bouncing on their legs, right? A lot of the times they're loose on their legs, bouncing around, and every single bounce is a stretch shortening cycle. You're lengthening the tendons and ligaments, and then you're shortening, contracting, lengthening. It's not as powerful, but every single little bounce in your fighting stance or bounce on your legs, if you're skipping, it's the same idea. You're loading the energy, and then you're releasing the energy. You can do that as not so powerful or very powerful if you're trying to make a lot of force. So that's the stretch shortening cycle, all those types of actions. And with tendons and ligaments, you want to be careful. We talk about two different features to them, two different properties. Elastic, or no, pardon me, I'm getting confused here. So we talk about stiffness if we're looking at tendons and ligaments, and that's just the ability for them to be stiff and hold on into a certain position. And then there's also compliance, and compliance is the ability to use that elastic energy. So you want to train in a way that makes your tendons and ligaments more compliant, because it's important to understand when you are doing box jumps, when you're doing stretch shortening cycle actions, you're if you think about the standard box jumps where you pop down and pop back up as fast as you can, trying to get as much height as you can, those are not actually working the muscle so much. Those are actually working the tendons and ligaments. Those are working the stretch shortening cycle. Opposed to if you're doing a box jump, say, and you go down into a squat position and you pause, you hold, you take rid of that bounce at the bottom. Now you've gotten rid of the stretch shortening cycle, and you're using the muscles more to get yourself up onto that box. So when you're training box jumps or training any type of thing, think about that. Are you bouncing at the bottom? Are you bouncing through that? That would be the stretch shortening cycle. If you're taking that away and you're holding it, you're using the muscles more, opposed to the joints and the tendons and ligaments that are using it when you do the stretch shortening cycle. Okay, so it's actually the joints that are doing more of these. Think about plyometrics. Plyometrics are very much based off of stretch shortening cycle actions, shuttles, that kind of thing. Same thing with a shuttle where you're going from one point and bursting out to the next. You're loading the energy usually in one leg at this point and then bursting over into the other side. That's also a stretch shortening cycle action, okay? So we're using this action in a lot of plyometric movements, a lot of sport action movements. So what everybody always wants to know is, how do you train the stretch shortening cycle? What's the best approach to do this? Well, if you think about it, we know now that the stretch shortening cycle is an eccentric phase, a lengthening phase, followed immediately by a concentric phase. So you want to kind of train in that way. The eccentric phase of every exercise, so if we're looking at a squat, it's the downward motion of a squat. That is actually going to be more important for developing force in the stretch shortening cycle than the concentric action. You really, it's the efficiency of the eccentric action that is going to be able to generate more force in the concentric when you're using stretch shortening cycle. I hope that kind of makes sense. Again, just trying to remember your concentric and your eccentric. So when you're training, you really want to kind of overload the eccentric action, slow, elongated, and then, there's a couple different ways to do it, but a good way to do it is just train the eccentric action, focus really on the eccentric action, load up on the plates, do a low, slow contraction eccentrically, do that for a couple sets, and then in your next set, do a concentric contraction where you're actually more, starting from the bottom. If we're talking about squats, you can actually put the pillars in on the side that'll stop the bar. So you go down into your squat, you actually completely let the weight off, put it onto the bar, and then you explode up. That's just the concentric. So now you've worked the eccentric followed by the concentric, and in a different session, you wouldn't do this in the same session if you were doing the first type of training. You can do both, the eccentric followed by the concentric. Box jumps, like I said, are great, and a good way to train the stretch shortening cycle using box jumps is by using depth jumps, okay, or depth to box jumps, like standing on a small box, stepping off of it, and then jumping immediately onto a larger box from the floor. So the higher the small box that you jump off of, the more intensity it's going to be on the actual eccentric action. But again, you want to try and focus on exploding and getting that movement. When we do a counter movement jump, a vertical jump, you can think about that as a stretch shortening cycle action. You're bouncing down and bouncing up and trying to jump as high as you can. So you want to kind of train the tendons and ligaments in that kind of way if you're training the stretch shortening cycle, right? That's important. This isn't something that should be trained for everybody. So depth to box jumps are great. Squat jumps are great. And then again, plyometrics. So any type of shuttles, any type of like agility training, it works the stretch shortening cycle. The agility ladder works great for this. Any type of agility or plyometric training is usually utilizing the stretch shortening cycle in your lower body, in your knees or your legs or your hips. So think about that when you're training. That's what you kind of want. But do you want to be training the stretch shortening cycle? Who should be training it? Well, again, it goes back to thinking about what is your sport, what is your performance, what are you trying to do, and do you use the stretch shortening cycle? When we look at the combat sports, like I said before, a lot of the combat sports use the stretch shortening cycle, like karate, like taekwondo, even MMA, depending on your style of fighting. You do a lot of bouncing around. So those type of athletes who are going to be bouncing and then exploding, those are the type of athletes that are going to want to use the stretch shortening cycle and want to train it specifically in those ways. Any other sports, also like basketball players who are doing a lot of cutting, that kind of thing, like laterally shuffling, laterally cutting, same as soccer players cutting through, though they're also going to want to do a little bit of stretch shortening cycle, but it might not be a priority, right? You need to think about where is this a priority for you in your training. Now, it's important to know, too, that stretch shortening cycle is very hard on the joints. We talked about it, right? You're utilizing the joints and the tendons and ligaments more so than the actual muscles. So we need to be careful when we are training the stretch shortening cycle, when we are training the tendons and ligaments, that we make sure to give ourselves enough rest. Like we say, like 24 to 48 hours between each training session that focuses on the tendons and ligaments or the stretch shortening cycle. You're going to want to give yourself enough break, because we are talking about our joints here, right? We don't want to, this is just good injury prevention. We don't want to blow out our joints. If we put too much pressure, too much load on the tendons and ligaments, they're not going to be able to contract, and they'll actually, become hindered, and then who knows, you might blow something and then you'll never be the same, right? So make sure you're giving yourself enough recovery between your stretch shortening cycle trainings. In a periodization plan, if we're thinking about throughout a year-long training plan, you want to put your stretch shortening cycle, your plyometrics and agility closer to your actual season, your in-season. And actually, even when you are in season, you, especially as you're getting close to the start of season, that's when you want to go heavy on the plyometric stretch shortening cycle stuff, about 4 to 6 weeks before your season starts. And then when you're in season, you should be training it about once a week as well, specifically training your plyometrics and that kind of thing, giving yourself enough rest, not only between your training sessions, but also between your competitions or your games or whatever you got going on. Again, you want to make sure you have enough rest on those, okay? So that's the stretch shortening cycle, the lengthening followed by a quick contraction that shoots your body or shoots your limb, whatever, in one direction. So that's what you want to think about. Again, those are the ligaments and tendons, not the muscles. So we're not thinking too much about the muscles on these ones. It's more about the tendons and ligaments. Of course, the muscles play a role. And in fact, the more muscle mass you have, or the more you work muscles, isolating them, and that kind of thing, the stronger the tendons are going to get, the more stiff they're going to get. Remember when I said it was stiff and compliant? The more stiff the tendons and ligaments are going to get if you work the muscle. So say you're doing like a leg extension exercises, those are going to build up the collagen in the tendons and ligaments, which make them more stiff, but which you do want. That's good for injury prevention. But you need to counteract that with some plyometric or some agility training, some box jumps, whatever, to make sure that they're not just stiff tendons and ligaments, but compliant, because that's what's going to make that elastic band snap back nice and hard, right? So just think about that. The elastic band analogy is great for stretch shortening cycle. You'll see it and hear it all the time. Think about it, train it. There it is, the stretch shortening cycle. All right, so if you guys have any questions about that, just send them my way. Again, this is a discussion. We want to talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. So send me your questions, and possibly I will feature it on the show. This week, let's get into now, for the very first time, a little bit of Sensei Says. Sensei says, do proper recovery protocols. Okay, this just goes along with already what we've talked about in this episode, guys. But I can't stress enough the importance of recovery. People get too carried away with their training. You know, the old school way of training was just train all the time, lift all the time, go to the gym every single day, lift those weights, get those gains, right? It's different now. The science has caught up. The science, especially, in sports, has caught up to the point that we know better now. We know that it's not just about time in the gym. The stuff you do in training, the stuff you do in the gym is great, but you're not going to be able to get the benefits if you don't properly recover. Okay, it's all about the recovery, because when you do work out, when you are training, you're putting stress on the body. You're actually breaking the body down. Literally, you are breaking down the proteins in your body and your muscles. You're breaking things down, and in the recovery, the body's natural response to that breakdown is to maybe add more, depending on how you train, add more muscle or make yourself stronger, or let the tendons and ligaments get more stiffer, whatever it is, it's the recovery that is actually doing the adaptations. It's not the workout, right? The workout is not what's making you stronger. It's not what's making you faster. It's the recovery which is making your performance improve, okay? So why are we not recovering properly? I see way too many times, people are in the gym every day, and especially athletes. I know it's tough because you want to train, right? You need to catch up to your opponents. If somebody's better than you, there's always somebody better than you. So you're trying to catch up to them, right? You're trying to be in the gym training every day, training nice and hard, but you're not letting yourself recover. You're becoming overtrained. You're not performing your best. So I cannot stress enough in this very first Sensei Says the importance of recovery. Okay, think about the type of training. Every type of training is different in how much you should recover. Usually it's about 24 hours. That's totally like a average guideline. Again, it depends on how you're training. If we're doing a lot of agility training or joint training and that kind of thing, we want to give ourselves like 48 hours in between. If we're doing a really high intensity, short burst, high intensity interval training, we might not need as long. Our body might be adapted, especially if we're more aerobically fit. If we're doing a big aerobic performance like a marathon or a half marathon, you might need 48 to 72 hours. It's different for everybody, right? But just think about what you're training, and are you fully recovered before you go on. Now, for athletes or people who do want to train every single day, you still can do it. You just need to be smart about how you do it, okay? You don't want to do like strength day, more strength, just compound lifts, big, heavy compound lifts all the time. You can't do that, right? That's more, you're going to get injured. You should do more like an undulating program where you're doing like a strength and then maybe an endurance or a hypertrophy, and then maybe an active rest day followed by a cardio, followed by maybe another strength with another compound, that kind of thing. You want to make sure your body is properly recovered. There is science now to back all this up. There is a proper way to recover and a proper way to work out. So look at it, get into research, look at what your goals are, how you're training, and how you should recover, how much you should, and what you should do to approach it. Okay, so think about that. Proper recovery. That's this week's Sensei Says. All right. Last new segment, 2 new segments coming at you for this episode of the KFit Show, and this is just Ask KFit. Okay, so I've had some questions come my way, and I appreciate it, and I ask you guys to send me more questions. Ask me whatever you want. I again, I want to help you guys, so ask me some questions. This week, I had a question come from Hannah, and Hannah asked me, how do I get more powerful? Hannah is an athlete in martial arts, and she wants to become more powerful, especially in her lower body, because that's where a lot of the power development comes. So remember, when we talk about power, we're talking about explosiveness, right? So high speed, getting that high speed power, and that kind of thing. So how do you get more power? Well, just training in a powerful way is not good enough. That is one way to do it. Of course, you want to think powerful. You want to think powerful movements from, right from the start of the exercise. So if we're doing squat jumps, you want to think about right from that bottom of that contraction, you're going 100% right away. Not a slow contraction, not like kind of building up speed and then 100%. As much as you can, you want to do, boom, 100% right away, especially in squat jumps or whatever you're doing. But another way to build up your power or your force development is by utilizing your post-activation potentiation, PAP, it's called PAP training, post-activation potentiation. And what that means is that after your muscles have already been potentiated or they've actually already been worked, you will have more force development after. So, an example of this would be doing a squat, like a standard slow speed squat for about 8 to 10 reps, 6 to 10 reps, pretty heavy, maybe about 75, 80%, 85% of your 1RM. So quite heavy. Doing about 6, 8, 10 reps of that, and then from there going right into a squat jump and trying to develop as much power as you can right from the bottom of the squat. So an isometric squat jump, I should say. So not the stretch shortening cycle action that we talked before, but when you're going down in your squat, pausing, and then exploding up, because now we want to train the muscles, right, to develop that power, and the tendons and ligaments. Absolutely, those play a role. But in this particular case, you want to train mostly the muscles. So do that. Go down into a squat position, pause in that isometric hold, and then explode up. Do that right after you do a submaximal squat. Okay, it's called post-activation potentiation. Because your muscles are already firing from that heavy squat that you just did, the motor units in the muscle are all already engaged. They're all already firing, so they're going to be able to fire even more efficiently when you're relying on more power. You're trying to get more power. So think about that. Do that in your training. Do about 3 to 4 sets of each of those. Do your slow sub-max squats, and then go right into a squat jump. That's going to help you build power in the power potential in your lower body. And then if you think about it too, for competition and that kind of stuff, you want to activate those muscles before in using those dynamic movements, doing some squat jumps actually before you go on into the performance. Think about that. That'll help develop that power in the lower body, and that's the way to train it. That's what it is, post-activation potentiation. Check it out. All right. Well, that pretty much wraps up this episode of the KFit Show. Can you believe that? Like I said, 2 new segments coming at you this week, and I'm going to keep these going, I think. Sensei Says and Ask KFit, two things that where I can offer, not just the science and proper ways to do things, but how I approach these things, right? And how I train my athletes, how I train people, and how I get them going in some of those things. So those are the 2 new segments. I hope you guys like them. Let me know if you have any questions. Send them my way. Kalan Anglos, you'll find me KFit Conditioning on Facebook. Kalan Anglos on all the social media stuff. Plug, whatever. Find me. Ask me whatever questions you guys have, and we'll get fired up and go from there. We got some guests coming at us in the next couple of weeks, next few weeks coming at us. So keep an eye on that. Some guests coming back on to the KFit Show. And again, these episodes come out every Wednesday morning. Don't forget to subscribe. YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, all that great stuff, guys. Subscribe to the KFit Show so you don't miss a single show, and that you can train to optimize your performance, because that's what we're all about. All right, guys, thanks for tuning into this episode, and we will talk to you next week.